You can now shoot the next big Netflix series using the Sony FX3. But will you? Now, I'm a little bit late to the game on this announcement of the FX3 being approved for Netflix usage. It's a big game-changing moment for the camera, that's for sure. It joins the ranks of the other Sony cameras like the FX6, the FX9, of course the Sony Venice, which is at the top of the Sony lineup, as well as other cameras such as the C70, which is probably going to be the main competition really if you were considering one or the other for a Netflix show, or then going up to obviously the higher end cameras like the Reds and the Arris. So why wasn't the Sony FX3 approved before, and what's changed, what they've added to the camera to make it Netflix approved? Netflix have always had a criteria list that a camera must meet to be approved for shooting one of their series. This includes quite obvious things like must be 4K. It's a reason why a lot of the Alexas haven't been able to be used on Netflix shows despite being quite clearly the most popular cinema camera in Hollywood. There's also minimum requirements such as the bit rate, being able to shoot in a log profile or hopefully RAW is kind of what they want. And also technical things like being able to record the timecode into the camera so you can sync up multiple cameras. This is the things that they want to see in a cinema camera to have it approved for their shows. Now, quite clearly, there's a lot of cameras out there that are very, very close to meeting the spec requirements for shooting with Netflix. And certainly image quality wise, I'd say most modern cameras, even mirrorless ones now, are probably more than good enough in terms of quality to be used in a Netflix show. Clearly, the problem has been other barriers that have limited them being approved for shooting on Netflix. Things like not having timecode, for example. And that's the big change with the latest update for the Sony FX3, which I think has suddenly pushed it into the world of being approved for Netflix. The latest update added the ability to input timecode into the Sony FX3. You just have to buy this odd, very expensive small cable to make that work. And if you do that and you have something to sync your timecode with, then yes, you can use the Sony FX3 on a Netflix show. But that brings up the big question. Does any of this really matter? Will you actually be going out shooting a series for Netflix? And even if you are, do you even need to follow these specs? Reality, no. It makes no real difference whatsoever. If you want to shoot a show and Netflix decide to buy that show off you, they don't actually care what you shot it on, as long as it's obviously good enough quality, which I'd presume they've seen it at that point and like it because they're handing money over to you for it, in which case none of this really matters. You don't need to meet any of those criteria. This means if you wanted, you could shoot on a Blackmagic camera, you could shoot on the FX3 before the update, you could shoot it on an A7 IV. It doesn't really matter. As long as the content is really good and they want to buy it off you, then great. You've just sold a show to Netflix. Where this really matters is if you want to get commissioned by Netflix. So for example, you have a pitch for an idea of a show and you say to them, hey, this is what I want to produce and this is the camera I want to shoot it on. And if that's the case and they approve the budget for you to do that, I think you'll probably have a much bigger budget than just going with the Sony FX3 or just the camera that you happen to own. I think in that case, you're probably going to have a decent sized budget to actually go out and find the right camera for the whole production. After all, in the grand scheme of things, the actual camera cost is going to be a very small cost to the overall production budget that you will be dealing with. Where I think the FX3 will be useful for Netflix shows is using it as a small documentary camera or as a B camera to the FX6 and FX9. I could see this being very useful, for example, with in-car shots. I could see it being very popular in that sort of situation. It also might be great for a show that needs to do a lot of traveling and needs to stay very light and small. Then they just be able to grab the FX3 and keep it really stripped down, or pack it down and easy travel with it, unlike bigger cameras, especially like the FX9. And what about the rest of us? The rest of us that own the Sony FX3? Does it really make any difference to us for our corporate clients or for the music videos that we do? Well, no, not at all. Other than saying that you can tell your clients that this is a Netflix approved camera, which might impress your clients, but really that's it. It's not going to make a world of difference. It's not going to change whether you shoot a documentary, for example, on your own back and then suddenly it gets picked up by Netflix. that still won't make any difference whatsoever, and it's still the same as it was before. It's still the great camera it was before. It's got some great new features with the update, but this doesn't mean suddenly the FX3 is a replacement for much more expensive cameras. It is still a very compact, great little cinema camera, but it still has those limitations. It still has its background in the mirrorless world coming from the A7S III. So I'd love to know what you think about the Netflix approval of the FX3. Is there any other cameras you think really should be approved by Netflix but haven't yet been? And the other part, I guess, is, does any of this really matter? Have you ever cared about Netflix approval? There always seems to be a lot of chat about it online, but as I said, in reality, it doesn't really matter. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a like and also subscribe, because there'll be plenty more videos coming from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.